So Black, Brown, Asian American, Native American students, women in science and whatnot. And it's at all levels. So it doesn't have to be just college students or just high school students. It could also be middle school and elementary students. So there's lots of great opportunities for that. So I'm really excited. Um, what I will be going for is a couple of things. So I'm going to share my screen now. Um, and hopefully you can see this. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat or come off of mic because although I have two screens, I can't see everything exactly where you all are at. So feel free to jump in. Um, so my goal for this is really just to kind of give you a quick overview. Ms. Turner was saying before, we spent 4 hours going over this, or 3 hours at the ACT conference. This is just, I'm hoping about 30 to 45 minutes just to kind of go over some things and then actually have time for you to ask questions if you have for me. And a big piece for me is really understanding two things. One is what we call backward design in terms of if you are creating a program from scratch, what are some things what are the outcomes you want to have? And then how should you design your program to do that? I think we're doing a second workshop on that later, but I want to highlight some important aspects of that. And then the second piece is really understanding kind of your organizational structure and how that impacts how you deliver your work-based learning programs. Because sometimes we forget, and I do this too, right? We have rules at our institutions that sometimes kind of sort of make sense to us, but not really to our students. And so in that case, we have to sometimes um, really think about, is that a rule really meant to help us, or is that a rule because somebody upstairs thinks that it's a good idea to do, and now, it's impacting our students in ways we didn't anticipate. So I always like to start with, what is work-based learning? And you all have a great definition for that. I looked it up. And in general, and I do this because lots of folks have different definitions at different states and different institutions. In general, work-based learning, it's an educational approach that combines academic learning with real-world experiences to help students develop skills for the workplace. And it can take place in a workplace, in simulated environments. There were some interesting projects at the conference where people were talking about doing simulated workplace learning. So that was interesting. And then community-based experiences as well. This is one area where I found, especially in rural areas. So Colorado State University Pueblo is in a rural area. And so we have a lot of experiences for students at community organizations. And what's interesting is sometimes students don't consider it work, which I find fascinating because it's at a nonprofit. And so there's this interesting aspect about students thinking about whether nonprofits as quote unquote work or nonprofit work as work, and it is. It's fascinating to hear them when we're introducing those opportunities to hear what they say about that. Um, and again, this is Colorado's work-based learning continuum. I believe you have something very similar to this. I highlight it just because it's a good visual. I find myself having to really make sure I highlight this for a lot of the folks that I work with. Because a lot of times people think, oh, okay, so we're gonna create an internship, right? And that is work-based learning, and that's gonna help students understand. And so I have to take a step back and really talk with faculty and kind of some of the industry folks that we're working with, business folks, to talk about there's actually a continuum, right? If we just have an internship, but we're not doing anything with the students about how to understand what the role of the internship is, who to talk to about this, the different ways you can utilize an internship, then they may not get the best picture for them. And so I don't know about you, but I've had experiences where I've had an amazing internship experience for a student, but the student didn't see it that way because the student didn't get any mentorship or didn't do kind of informational interview ahead of time before they go into it or at any time during the internship to really get a sense of what they're supposed to learn. And for me, informational interviews are really important because those are the interviews that you do, not in sense of asking, well, what's your job day to day? A part of it is, but the other piece of it is, how did you get interested in your job? What were some of the things that you did before you actually had this job, um, that got you interested or on this pathway? How did you move up? What are some of the skills that you need? Those kinds of things. Um, and then at the other end, right, we work with our business partners a lot to say, even if you had a student who had a great internship, what are you doing in terms of on-the-job training and doing more employee development? I will be perfectly honest with you all. I love my institution. We do a great job of hiring faculty and staff that look like our students, and we're a Hispanic serving institution, so we have a lot of folks of color. But we do very little around employee development, and like that's another area that needs a lot of work. And so a good kind of program thinks about all these along the way and then ensures that the folks responsible for providing the best kind of training is at the head of that design. So in our case, it's talking to our business leaders and saying, if we create an on-the-job, we get this a lot as a university, right? Can you help us create on-the-job training or education for like workforce redevelopment? And we're like, sure, but just so you know, like on-the-job training is really your area. What we can do is try to highlight skills and knowledge, but you will have to put together the assessment or the way that students can develop the competencies in using those two things. So I hope that makes sense. Um, and so I always like to highlight this particular report. And when I send you this, my goal is to send you the links to all these slides. Is Strata is an education network. They're a national foundation organization. They fund a lot of projects as well. So if you're looking for funding, that would be a good place to check out. They did this really great report, and there's actually several of these on the power of work-based learning. And they kind of identified stuff that we already know is true, right? There's no question about this to us, right? Paid internships are linked to getting paid more after graduation. It's tied to economic post-graduation success, both at the high school level, but then also at the college level. Students who have paid internships have greater confidence and they're more successful in the job market. And then, of course, that access to paid internships is really uneven. Uh, so this is nothing new to us. Specifically, I think what's important to note about the access to paid internships, Black, Latino students, as usual, as a whole, have less access, but also women and low income and first generation students, including white students, are less likely to experience a paid internships. Even when you control for variation across majors, they remain. So in the arts, humanities, businesses, all across. I think what's also really fascinating though, in rural areas, they didn't highlight that in this report, but in rural areas, internships are also paid internships are also not only uneven, I would add in some cases can be unaccessible. We have a number of work-based learning programs, again, for the entire pipeline of students from high school to college. And many of them are in Colorado Springs, which is about an hour, 50 minutes north of us here in Pueblo, Colorado. The challenge is we have no transportation for those students to get to Colorado Springs. So again, right, we have internships, but we don't have a transportation system to get them to those internships. So sometimes it's not just about that they're unpaid. It's the accessibility of those good internships or paid ones are also hard to find. This is again is just a little bit more data around how students report feeling when they have those paid internships and knowledgeable about careers. So, and I think this is not surprising to many of us. You know, the confidence and knowledge and skills to be successful in the job market, 77% of students who have a paid internship, you know, are confident about that. Um, uh, those that have paid internships, 66% know what they're interested in and are going to plan on doing that for work later on. 62% have a good understanding of the job market, and 56% support the school. They believe their school has support for connecting education to a meaningful career. Um, and I think, and so this is paid internships, unpaid internships. The green is students with no internship, and then students that have a job or job related to the field of study. Um, I think this is one that at the college level, I will say we highlight as the benefit of having internships. And again, because I'm at a university level, I will tell you, everybody here believes in internships. The challenge is, do they understand the impact of uh, targeted, planned internships, i.e., just because we have an internship program doesn't mean that we're going to have high success rates for our students. It's how those internships are designed. It's who participates. Are they paid? Where are they located? How are they connected to the classroom? Just having an internship isn't enough. Or having a work-based learning experience isn't enough. It's all these other things that we talked about or highlighted in the slide before that are also critical. I will say this, one of the challenges, a different challenge that we have here at CSU Pueblo is, as I've said before, we have placements in Colorado Springs. The challenge for us is the students who do those placements wind up seeing Colorado Springs as a more viable option for them. So yes, they go and they do it and they're successful, but then they're like, yeah, I want to move to Colorado Springs now. I don't want to stay in Pueblo because the job that I want is not here, it's there. And so that creates, in the long run, a different challenge for us in rural areas, in that we're trying to encourage and develop the skills, knowledge, and competencies of our students here in our area so that they'll stay and help our local community thrive, but the placement is in another bigger, fancier city with more opportunities. So of course they're going to go there. And so, and that's a kind of chicken and egg issue, right? And so I think that's one of the areas that we as a university are really trying to work with our K-12 partners and our community college around how do we develop more of those opportunities here in our area. And so again, kind of when we look at this, so disaggregate by race and gender, we also see kind of some interesting outcomes. Again, these are differences exist among racial ethnic groups. This is focusing on college graduates, but what's interesting about this is based on college graduates on the Baccalaureate and Beyond longitudinal survey, so this is talking about students throughout their continuum. So it's not just when they were in college, but after they graduated, what did they do? What did they engage with? And I think this is the part where um, I think it's really helpful to see the impact, again, of work-based learning on paid and unpaid students by race and gender, by race, and then adding in gender as well. Um, Students, and again, like I've said before, students of color were less typically likely to hold internship opportunities, and participation varies by discipline. Black and Latino graduates, particularly women, were least likely to have a paid internship. Um, and I think, again, this goes back to at some institutions that I've worked with, some programs, K-12 programs, a lot of them will talk about, well, we don't have it here at the K-12 system, so we want to do this in the middle school or the high school. So we want to make sure they get involved in the college. What the university or college level, we still have issues of access as well. So I think again, um, that aspect, at least here that we have in a rural area of, well, we won't get it now in K-12, we'll get it in college. It doesn't manifest. And so that's why at least again, for us, we're really interested in partnering with our K-12 partners to ensure that at some point throughout the students' experience that they're getting one of these work-based learning opportunities. Um, and then again, those who studied engineering, computer information sciences, or business, fields in which students of color and women have been historically underrepresented, we're most likely to have a paid internship. So those fields we know offer them, our students are less likely to have them. In addition, first generation and federal Pell Grant recipients were also less likely to have a paid internship compared to continuing generation. I mean, I think one of the interesting parts about this as well is that money we know is a big issue for our students. I will add a second thing. Even in places where you're trying to address the money issue, could be other programs that are impacting how students access these kinds of resources. So I'll frame it this way. At Colorado State University Pueblo, we have a large concurrent enrollment program or opportunities, which means in K-12 students in high school, and I think even in middle school, students can start taking college level classes. And we have students take advantage of that because what that does, it decreases their time at college so they could go to work, which we have students who do that. The other thing we have is a 2+3 program, which incoming freshmen, sophomores can, as an undergrad, take master's level courses. And when they graduate in about 5 years, they will graduate with both their bachelor's and a master's. Those are great opportunities. However, both those opportunities, concurrent enrollment and our 3+2 programs, require a lot of time in the classroom, which means students who do those pay less in the short term around college. But what winds up happening is they're not able to engage in these activities like work-based learning because they have so little time outside the classroom because they're taking college level courses, they're taking their academics and accelerated kind of academic journey. So they don't have as much time. So this is another area where, at least at our institution, kind of my work is around how can we find opportunities for work-based learning for our students, especially those we're trying to help in shortening their time to degree, but at the same time, right, like it's great to graduate with your degree, but if you have no skills or any kind of examples of work that you utilized with those skills, it can be hard to get a job, and that is what we're finding. So that's a lot of information that I threw at y'all. So I'm going to stop for a second and see if you have any questions. You can raise your hand, you can throw in the chat.
There's nothing in the chat right now.
Yep.
I think we're still just listening.
Okay. Yeah, not a problem. Right. At any point, if you have questions, again, feel free to let me know. This next piece, I always think it's fine to talk about data, right? But let's talk about real students, right? Or a real student experience. So I always like to share about Stephen's story. So Stephen is a real student, but this is not Stephen. Just want to make it clear. And Stephen is a real student who is an African-American student who I worked with at a local high school through an internship program. But this is not him. Uh, like I said, I worked on an internship program. Stephen is a pseudonym for a real student. That's not his real name either. He was a really nice, sweet, smart student. Again, he was one of my interns at a university when I was in Michigan. He always worked hard, but we would talk every once in a while. He would always say, "Yeah, like I feel like I'm behind in school." And one of the reasons why is because he was raised by a single mom, and he was going to I forgot what we call it in Michigan, but it was a charter school that was also like a special pipeline school to our university. And so he was only one of the few Black men at the school. At the time, this is Michigan. I have to say this. Stephen knew he was gay, but he hadn't come out to anybody on campus. I think the only reason he came out to me is because uh, I am gay, and I would my partner, my child, with my family would come to work at events. Stephen was a part of our staff, and so when we would have staff events, we would invite him and everybody's family to us, and so he knew that. Um, but he hadn't come out to anybody else on campus to us except for me when we would kind of chat. And he would not say anything. He didn't say anything to his friends. He didn't say anything to his family. Um, and so, but that was part of his identity. And then I did notice as a student, right? He was a brilliant student, right? He was going to a really hard school, trying to get into Michigan, which is the University of Michigan, which is the flagship at University of Michigan. But he always seemed to be jumping from job to work to internship, moving stuff around. I was actually the last internship placement that we had in our program. He could have been in a lab. He could have been at a community. He was at a community organization, in a lab, and something else. Um, and so one of the things too that was supposed to do, one of the other options he had was he was supposed to work at Target doing an internship with the store manager. Um, but after a couple of weeks, he had found himself working with what he said. This is to me, this angry Mexican lady with no eyebrows, and she kept burning the popcorn. And he talked about having scheduling issues, and he couldn't always follow the manager because during the day, and he had school. So then they got him a job working with me. Um, and again, he was supposed to be part of a project team, but after training getting started, he couldn't think of a project. Um, so he kind of was milling about, not really doing anything. Um, and so basically, the time came to graduate, and he was like, he had options to either stay in a job that he had found, like after working with me, right? He went back to school, working at a job at Walgreens and become an assistant manager, making 35,000 a year. And in 5 years, becoming a store manager, 45. But he really wanted to come to school at University of Michigan, and that was what his ultimate dream was. But he was like, I kept bouncing around. I had a great experience. I had found my community at University of Michigan. I found my community here with you all. Um, but I can either, and really this was his question, right? I can either get a quote unquote real job with real money and help my mom, or I can take a chance and go to college and probably take on debt and maybe be able to find something later. And I think that was like that in and of itself was a real question that Stephen was asking, not just of me in general, but kind of life in terms of his next steps. And I think that is one of the areas that, from my perspective, work-based learning, if we're done correctly, and I take ownership for, like, I talked to Stephen, but I don't know if I did enough to make the connections between work and my experience with him, right? But I think a big piece of this takeaway, and this is the research part of the work that we try to do, is that students do not operate in a vacuum. They don't live in a vacuum. They come with their own knowledge, skills, competencies, and experiences. And and really, Stephen, when he comes to us, right, he has relationships with family, he has relationships with faculty and staff, with other students, with other friends, both at his high school, at home, but then also within his community and with us. And so when I highlight this sociological model, what I'm trying to say is all those things come into play when Stephen is experiencing his work-based learning, whether it's with me, whether Walgreens or Target or some other place, right? He is experiencing these things and bringing all his identities in life with him. And I think one of the things that those of us that design these kind of experiences really need to think about is in what ways do our policies, practices, and programs might be disadvantaging some students and or impacting how they experience our programs. So what we've been telling a lot of our students before, and what Stephen's story makes me think about is, so in Stephen's case, it was really about do I take the chance on school, on university? He liked his work-based experience with us. He liked my staff. He liked the community he was able to build and feel. So we like, yeah, coming to college full time would socially help him very well. But there's this question about what about going into debt, right? What if it costs me a lot of money and then I have nothing to show for it? That is a real question we get from many high school students. Now you add a new piece. So that, I don't know if you all heard of stuff about like the new FAFSA and all the issues coming with filling it out and getting it submitted and getting it done. So you throw in just a policy piece that the university I don't have any control over whatsoever. You throw that into the mix, and then you can see how in Stephen's case, right, if we were having issues with FAFSA and then he heard, well, some people aren't getting the money, some people are really having a hard time filling it out. With a FAFSA, you have to get your parents' income. That was a whole separate issue that I knew Stephen was dealing with. Um, that could have added to the roadblocks that really, even though our program was going really well or his experience was going really well, to him would see like, you know what, maybe this is not the best next step for me. Again, I don't think there's a, I will personally say, I don't think if he wanted to, and he did want to come to University of Michigan, but if he did want to stay and work at Walgreens, I think that would have been just as good a decision. However, choosing it because it's easier to apply and get started at Walgreens and not bother to go through FAFSA. I think that is the not the criteria that should be used to make that decision. And so that's how I try to make that distinction when talking about issues like this. And so I'm going to pause again um, and see if you have any questions, if that kind of is registering with any of you, or if you've seen that happen in your areas.
Dr. Vasquez, in North Carolina, we are trying to connect a lot of our students to youth pre-apprenticeships and
Mm-hmm.
youth apprenticeships.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are targeted measures
Mm-hmm.
to get to our underrepresented populations. But I
Mm-hmm.
think we still have to take in everything that you said. You mentioned that when we are targeting these students and we're saying you will be a great candidate for this particular program, we do have to look at that whole student
Mm-hmm.
and not just another placement, but look at everything that they're bringing to the table.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some of those social, emotional
Mm-hmm.
um, barriers or challenges, issues that they bring with themselves that we don't think about when we're putting them in that placement. And I think that's very eye-opening
Mm-hmm.
as we go forward in trying to get students into some of these paid
Yeah.
experiences, and maybe some of the reasons why they're not getting
Mm-hmm.
into some of the experiences, because maybe they need to work
Mm-hmm.
at home and they just don't see the value in, you know, the
Mm-hmm.
future as opposed to right now.
Exactly. And then one of the things I'm going to talk about is this concept of familismo, which we talked about there, but you're bringing it up, right? There's this other aspect of we may have students who are part of, especially Latino communities here in rural Colorado, where I live. We have students who are helping to bring in income for their families. And if the family owns a small business like a restaurant, or they're helping to work. We still have manual farms in our area. If the student sometimes has to make a decision between, oh, do I go do this other thing that pays, okay, minimum wage, or in some cases volunteer, or do I help my family? That's like, regardless of what that decision that they have to make, that they have to then tell their family, is also part of, I think, what causes at least our students a lot of stress. That we have students who want to do stuff in tech, and they're like, I can't, because if I do this, um, I can't work it. I can't work the family business. And I've had students who are coming to college here because I'll sit at the recruitment fairs. And I've had great conversations with families, parents about, oh, our student Johnny's going to do this and blah, blah, blah. And then the parents kind of walk away and I'll talk to Johnny and Johnny's like, yeah, I don't want to do this. But if I don't, if I don't take this path, or if I don't help them with the business, our business will go down and it's a rural area. And so like, we'll have to fire the 20 employees. That was a real story an 18-year-old told me. And I'm like, that's too much pressure for an 18-year-old to have the lives of not just your family, but 20 other people that work in the business have for you. And like, that was just, I had never thought about that before. Again, because I lived in in an urban area, not a rural area, but that just was really eye-opening to me. So yeah, I think that what you said is definitely something to really consider. What I have found is the challenge of how do you get at that is one where our roles as educators and really great. I mean, I see us all as teachers. The teacher has a really great job in knowing how to connect with students. So connecting to our students and really learning about their families is how we understand what their experience in life is like. I love this. So Alma calls, it's very important to look at each student individually and holistically. The traditional student in high school is less of the norm today. Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, lifing. They all I
Mm-hmm.
hear that all the time. Life is
Mm-hmm.
lifing for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know we have about 20 minutes left in the call, but what would be like the top tips that you would give
Mm-hmm.
us as educators and work-based learning coordinators to incorporate into our policies and procedures
Mm-hmm.
to help us design these equity work-based learning models for our students to make sure that we aren't missing the
Mm-hmm.
boat.
Well, and I think there's six areas that I would look at. Relationships and connections are one, and that's what we've talked about. I think policies, practices, and resource flows are the other three areas. And you'll see this in the slideshow, but I'm not going to pull it up.
Okay.
But I think the policies and practices are the ones that we don't look at really well. But I think once we try to look at them, then we see how they can impact us. So I'll frame it this way. Going back to the student who has to get parents' permission to do work, like that is important. Right. It is standard policy that if students are going to engage in any kind of off-campus activities, that they have to have parents' permission. Totally understandable. I think what is also very interesting, though, is when it comes to things like work-based learning and students having to make the decisions between, I'll give my own example. It was hard for me to get a job for a couple of years in high school because I was the oldest child. I had straight A's. I had perfect attendance. When it came to class, I was good. But my mom worked nights. So when I came home, I would take care of my baby brother because we didn't have anybody. She was a single mom. She didn't have her, we had issues with our family. So I had to take care of him. So the first 2 years, when I first started working, or when I first became the age to start working, I couldn't work. I couldn't do after school stuff because I had to go home and take care of my baby brother. There were lots of opportunities that I wanted to do. And my mom did say in English, well, she me dijo, si lo quieres hacer, lo puedes hacer. We'll figure it out. You can do it. And she would say that. She would say, if you want to do something, you can do it. We'll be able to do it. But I knew as a child that it would involve her work changes, asking my aunt or asking her mom or her mother-in-law, who she was not on the good side with, to make all these sacrifices to give me this opportunity. I knew my mom would do it, but I didn't want to ask her. That's one, right? That's a power dynamic, but that's a policy, right? So for me, it's always like, so one is when are the opportunities happening? And do the opportunities have to happen after class or can they be done during class? Because if it was 9 to 5, I could do it no problem. Or if it was earlier in the morning, I could do it. And I found opportunities to do that later on. That's one. Number two is, when do we really need parents' permission because it requires parents' permission versus um, something else. And I think I gave the example of a very similar story, but I gave a slightly different example at the workshop. It's um, when we do site visits or when you're organizing site visits, again, asking parents permission to be able to do this, totally fine, right? The other piece of that is, um, and this is kind of a practice, and sometimes it's a policy. Our students are people, and I always say students make mistakes. But especially in K-12, I would say also in some cases in universities, we use work-based learning programs as a reward mechanism and not as a work-based learning. It's an opportunity to engage. And so I've seen, and we talked about it during the workshop, where folks had said, well, the students are going to go make the site visit, but then they did something. I'm not going to judge what they did, but they just did something. And so now it's like, well, they can't go anymore because they did not earn this privilege. As an educator, and then they tell the parents. So then that brings in a whole different scenario with the parents. So for me, it goes back to, is your work-based learning program a social activity or an earned activity, or is it an educational activity that's part of the curriculum that you're trying to engage students in so that they can think about their careers in the future? This is the way I say it. So does this mean that another class, say biology, is a privilege then? And so if I do something wrong in my English class, you're going to take the biology class away from me and say I can't go? Especially about or chemistry. I loved chemistry because you could blow stuff up or put stuff on fire. That's what our teachers used to do to get us engaged. Does that mean they treat it? No, we don't treat it the same way. So why do we do that with work-based learning? That's a different challenge because a lot of times those are policies set by like our principals or assistant principals or senior leadership. That involves a power dynamic, which is again one of the things, systems change things that we need to look at, and trying to really change their mental model of how they think about work-based learning. And I think that's one of the real challenges that we have who do this kind of work, is trying to articulate to the people who make the rules, right? We're talking about an educational opportunity that is helping students think of their lives differently in the future. And when you treat it as a field trip, it's not a field trip. It is a work-based learning visit, right? Or something. We are trying to engage students in a different way of thinking about what work looks like. If you're calling it a field trip, you're not helping us get the students to think differently about what school means or work-based learning. So that's my high horse. Sorry. Does that help? Is that?
Yes, yes,
Mhm.
thank you.
Yeah. What other stuff, questions I have? So here's some other advice, and these are in the slides. So I'll send this to you, but questions that you should be asking of your program. So these are just, I have a program. What are some assessment questions I should ask, right? How well do we assess whether students master the skills and knowledge our programs seek to teach them? I would argue a good work-based learning program, regardless if it's at the school or at a business or at a nonprofit, you as the educator should be identifying what are this, and in partnership with the placement, asking them, so what are the skills and knowledge you think our students need to have before they start, and then that they'll develop during, um, so that you can assess it afterwards. Because one of the best things that you can do in terms of marketing your program is letting students and parents and your, principals know, or whoever, right, your directors, your high school partners know, is if students take these placements, they will learn these kinds of technical skills, assessment skills, research skills, that they can then use, for work or for school. I think the second piece, and this is really hard, and I have found this is based state by state. So I don't know if North Carolina does this, is tracking what happens to students when they leave your institution, so either at high school level or the community college, college level, where do they go and what are they doing? Because you will see a difference between students who have good placements, regardless at what level, and where they end up, if they have a good placement. Because part of it is, is the field placement that they got well aligned with whatever degree program, high school, community, associates, bachelors, um, career technical certificates, things like that. So, um, and then I would say the last thing is how well, or what are you learning from your partners, your employer partners, you all as program faculty and alumni, student alumni, to ensure that your programs prepare students to succeed in their education or career technical program. So we have a Boys and Girls Club here that it does not call itself a work-based learning program, but they have all the aspects of one. They do a lot of after-school activities with their students. Um, from middle school on through high school. And what I found was very interesting the last time I went to a meeting that they had is is they've grown over the years, over the past 10 years, they've like tripled the number of students that they have. They like to say they have more, the Boys and Girls Clubs at the schools, at the high schools have more contact hours with their students than teachers do in the classrooms. And I believe them because it's at night and weekends. What they have done is created is as a student, you participate in various different activities. They're all organized around athletics, STEM activities, outdoor activities, whatnot. But what they've done is the students participate in the activities. As they get older, they move up in terms of being a student participant to being an assistant coach to being a coach. So now they have 10 years later, they have like 70% of their staff are former Boys and Girls Clubs students. Some of them went to college as well. Some of them went to community college. But I find it really interesting that that is the kind of experience that when we think about work-based learning, that's it, right? You get them as a student, they do some work, you get train them, and eventually they come back to work. That is amazing. And so I'm hoping at the next ACTE conference, I can highlight them and some of the work that they're doing because they were just amazing. So um, I'll share this. The last thing that I will give you, I'm not gonna like come back online or share my screen, but I'm gonna send to you, Ms. Turner, the presentation, and then there's an article. It's called "Hope in the Lives of Low-Income Students of Color." It's a qualitative study of experiences in a work-based learning program, and I like it because it talks about um, support. What does support look like from their supervisor, their placement supervisor? Um, they talk about what the caring school environment is about, how they look at their teachers and even the teachers that aren't a part of their placements, talking about when they see teachers talking, about math or science and they're excited about it, it makes them excited. And there's a couple other areas for talking about success. Um, talking about for students, especially, I believe these were high school students, that when they have an experience that they know is a job, but they don't call it a job, they're framing it from calling it my job to calling it my future career is another amazing experience that has helped for some students. Um, and then the last thing that I'll say is I really do think about this not in terms of just college or just K-12. It is a pipeline because in one of these, there's a quote from a student that talked about being in seventh grade wasn't their best year of their life. Um, and that when they were starting, so they weren't doing very well in class. Every parent teacher conference was like, oh, it's not going well. She's getting F's, all the bad stuff. But when the mom heard from the supervisor from the work-based program that they were in about how amazing work was going, that brought just a lot more hope to say, right, the student was like, I'm not a complete failure because I do have something to contribute. And it's these technical skills that I have. And on that note, I will end with, so I'm a PhD. I have 3 degrees from 2 very large institutions, University of Michigan, Michigan State. One can argue one of the smartest people in my community. My child was so scared to tell me he did not want to go to college. He wanted to be a cosmetologist. He was not doing well in freshman and sophomore year in high school. He's like, I'm trying, I just don't get it. I don't want to go to college, but I have this opportunity to go to cosmetology and get paid, have cosmetology school paid for by the high school, and then he would get work experience and everything. And he did that his last 2 years. When he started doing that, his grades at school flourished. And again, he was one of these, my family, my friends were like, well, what's your son doing? Well, where is he going to go? Is he going to go to Harvard because you're so smart and blah, blah? And I'm like, no, he's going to be a cosmetologist. And of course, I work with professors. So they're like, what? I'm like, no, he's going to be a cosmetologist. He likes cutting hair. He got his job. He also got his esthetician license and he's going to be doing nails. He's amazing. He's an artist. He likes to do all these things. And there was surprise, right? And I think the biggest thing that my own child, right, is telling me is, I didn't want to tell you because I thought you would be disappointed in me. And of course, as a parent, you're like, your children are never going to disappoint you. But that is how our students sometimes think about it, right? Even those of us we have a good relationship with, they, they're scared to tell us what they really want to do because of fear of judgment and fear of not supporting them anymore. And I think that's an important aspect to think about. And then that's why I say, if my child can think like that, of course, one of my students is probably thinking something like that as well, right? And so I always try to consider that. Again, I'll go back to Miss Almaco here. It's important to look at students individually and holistically when we design these things. And that is something that I ask students is, who is your most marginalized student? And when you picture them and think about them, say, would this student engage in my program? Or what are the parts of my program that may keep this student from participating? Then that's probably not a good policy or practice that we should be doing. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You guys, we have a few minutes left. If anyone wants to come off mute and ask questions or put anything in the chat, please do so.
Hi, John. I'm joining Sarah Shepard at the Career Center. I'm Deborah Cochran. I work at John F. Kennedy High School. We're a Title I school, so a lot of the internships will come down the pipe and specifically say just for Title I schools, and that's helped us tremendously.
Yeah. If you're looking for more funding, definitely look at that NSF, Department of Labor. I'll send that in the email to Janine. Partner with your universities with that, because I think Title I schools in particular, there is a way of developing the pipeline. So if your students can't do it at one point in their, educational pathway, they can do it at others. And that money is not meant just for universities. It's meant for all sorts of partners. And so you would be if you could find a partner, it'd be really great to do that with. So
Actually, last year, it was like the final 2 weeks of school, North Carolina AT&T, they got a grant, and our school career coordinator said we can only take 5 students, though, from the Title I schools. They're very specific. So, I immediately went to the classes that qualified, and they had to have a certain GPA, had to work in the summer. But we did get 2 of the 5 slots filled through John F. Kennedy High School.
Oh, good. Yeah. I will say what I love about NSF compared to Department of Education. So grants is my other area that I know too much about sometimes. Department of Ed always has those regulations. NSF is they get a lot more money. And those rules are a lot less restrictive. So, and this is NSF, and I want to say Department of Commerce. So when I said it, I'd be happy to help out if you want to reach out and give you some ideas. It's a long thing, but very helpful. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I thank you guys for attending today. Once I get the information from Dr. Vasquez, I will definitely make sure that I put that on. It's going to be on our live Google Doc that's found in the Moodle, the PowerPoint, and this recording will be on there as well. And I'll make sure that the links are attached. So thank you guys very much for showing up and participating today. And if you have any further questions, just don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. And next time it's assessment and evaluation.
Yes, yes. In the spring, we're going to talk about the difference between assessment and evaluation.
Yeah. It'll be fun. Thank you all.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.